Hold your hands out in front of you. Just take a look at them for a second. Look at the lines on your palms, the calluses on your fingers, the way your skin moves over your knuckles. Now, I want you to imagine those exact hands turning 30 years old. Depending on who you are, maybe you are already past 30, or maybe it still feels like a distant milestone. But I want you to picture the precise moment you blow out the candles on your 30th birthday cake. According to one of the most pervasive, stubbornly persistent biological myths in human history, the moment those candles go out, your prehistoric ancestors were supposed to just keel over and die of old age. We have this incredibly cartoonish image burned into our collective brain. We picture a caveman hitting his late 20s, suddenly growing a long white beard, grabbing a walking stick, and dramatically crumbling into dust. You have heard the phrase a million times. Life in the past was nasty, brutish, and short. Everyone was dead by 30. It is a terrifying thought, right? But it is also a complete biological lie. The idea that a 30-year-old in the Stone Age was considered a frail, dying elder is a massive misunderstanding of how math actually works. It is a statistical ghost. When historians and anthropologists look at ancient burial sites and tell us that the average life expectancy of a prehistoric hunter-gatherer was roughly 30 to 35 years, they are absolutely telling the truth. But average life expectancy does not mean the age at which most people naturally expired from old age. It is a mathematical trap. Let me put it this way. Imagine you are in a math class with only 2 students. On the final exam, you absolutely crush it. You study all night, you know every formula, and you score a perfect 100%. The other student? They never show up. They fail completely, and they score a 0. The teacher tallies up the grades and announces that the class average is exactly 50%. Now think about that. Did anyone in that room actually get a 50%? No. One person completely mastered the test, and the other person did not even make it past the starting line. That average tells you absolutely nothing about the actual lived experience of the students in that room. That exact mathematical illusion is what has been tricking us about our own evolutionary past. The ancient world was not filled with a bunch of 30-year-olds dying of natural aging. Instead, it was an environment of brutal extremes. You either died incredibly young, or you lived a remarkably long time. If an ancient human survived the terrifying gauntlet of early childhood, their biological default state was incredibly robust. Your ancestors possessed the exact same internal hardware that you do right now. Their hearts pumped the same way, their cells divided the same way, and their genetic code was virtually identical to yours. Nature did not upgrade our biology in the last 10,000 years. If an ancient hunter-gatherer made it past the age of 15, the math fundamentally shifted in their favor. They were fully capable of living into their 60s, their 70s, and even their 80s. They lived to see their grandchildren grow up. They became the respected elders of their tribes. They walked the earth for decades with gray hair and wrinkled skin, exactly like our grandparents do today. So this completely flips the script on human history. The human body was absolutely engineered to go the distance, even tens of thousands of years ago, while dodging predators in a frozen wilderness. We were built to last. But if they were not peacefully dying of old age at 30, and they had the biological hardware to reach 70, what exactly was driving that average life expectancy into the dirt? If they weren't dying of old age, what was the invisible filter slaughtering half the human population before they could even learn how to tie a knot? Let me ask you a question. Have you ever looked at a baby horse right after it is born? It drops out of its mother, hits the ground, shakes itself off, and within a couple of hours, it is literally sprinting across a field. Now, compare that to a human baby. A human baby is basically born as a completely helpless, squirming, fleshy little larva. You could not even hold your own heavy head up for the first few months of your life, let alone run away from a hungry predator. You were completely and utterly useless. This is not an insult. It is a biological fact, and it is the result of the most ruthless evolutionary negotiation in the history of planet Earth. Millions of years ago, our ancestors made a critical design choice. We stood up on two legs. Bipedalism was a fantastic hardware upgrade. It let us see over tall savanna grass and freed up our hands to throw rocks, build fires, and craft tools. But that upgrade came with a massive structural penalty. Walking upright required nature to completely re-engineer the human pelvis, making it much narrower. Around the exact same time, evolution decided to give us a massive, wildly complex, energy-guzzling supercomputer for a brain. So you have a rapidly expanding skull trying to fit through a significantly narrowing exit door. Nature had a massive engineering crisis on its hands. The only way to solve this biological bottleneck was to evict you from the womb long before you were actually finished baking. Biologists often refer to the first 3 months of human life as the fourth trimester, because we are born essentially premature compared to other mammals. We have to finish growing our massive brains on the outside. But being born as a helpless larva means you are completely defenseless in an environment that has been perfectly optimized to kill you. And I am not just talking about massive predators. The real threat was completely invisible. Today, we live in a highly sanitized bubble. You grew up with chlorinated tap water, antibacterial soap, and a medicine cabinet full of modern antibiotics. If you get an infection, you take a pill and it is gone in 3 days. Now strip all of that away. Imagine you are a prehistoric toddler crawling through the dirt of a temporary camp. You are touching soil where wild animals have slept, where pests scurry, and where other humans have left waste. And because you are a human baby, you immediately put your dirty hands directly into your mouth. Your tiny, completely uncalibrated immune system is instantly thrown into a brutal two-front war. On one side, you are fighting relentless environmental pathogens. A minor stomach bug from drinking contaminated river water, which today just means a day of drinking Pedialyte on the couch, was an absolute death sentence. Severe diarrhea would rapidly dehydrate a child and shut down their organs in less than 48 hours. On the other front, you were fighting a relentless army of parasites. Hookworms would literally bore through the soft skin of your bare feet, travel through your bloodstream, and set up camp in your intestines, quietly draining the nutrients from an already malnourished body. Mosquitoes acted as flying hypodermic needles, delivering malaria and other devastating fevers directly into your tiny system. This was the invisible carnage of prehistoric childhood. It was not a time of innocent play. It was a ruthless biological sorting algorithm. The childhood gauntlet was the ultimate filter of human history. Anthropologists estimate that in many ancient hunter-gatherer societies, nearly half of all children never survived to see their 15th birthday. Half of the entire population was wiped off the board before they even hit puberty. This staggering, horrific infant mortality rate is the exact mathematical weight that dragged our historical life expectancy down to that miserable 30-year mark. If you survived to 15, your immune system was essentially forged in titanium. You had beaten the hardest level of the game. But nature was not done with you yet. For the adults who actually made it through the childhood filter, their own bodies were about to betray them. So, you survived the childhood filter. You are 18 years old, standing in a prehistoric forest, fully grown and packed with dense muscle. By all modern accounts, you are in the absolute prime of your life. But here is the terrifying reality. The environment around you is not just dangerous, it is a cold, calculating machine perfectly designed to punish the slightest mechanical failure. In the modern world, if you break a bone or get a cut, your broken body is just a temporary inconvenience. You go to a doctor, get a fiberglass cast, take some pills, and sit on the couch watching movies while your cells magically knit everything back together. In the ancient world, there was absolutely no safety net. Your physical body was your only tool, and the moment it broke down, a very short countdown clock started ticking. Let us start with the most dangerous ticking time bomb sitting inside your own skull right now. Run your tongue over your teeth. Today, if you bite down on a hard, unpopped popcorn kernel and chip a molar, you are annoyed. You call a dentist, they drill it out, fill it with a composite resin, and you forget it ever happened. For an ancient hunter-gatherer, that exact same chipped tooth was frequently a slow, agonizing death sentence. Without a protective enamel seal, bacteria from rotting food would seep directly into the soft, vascular pulp of the tooth. It would fester in the dark. A massive abscess would form deep inside your jawbone. With absolutely no antibiotics to stop it, that localized infection would eventually rupture, pouring a lethal dose of aggressive bacteria directly into your bloodstream. Sepsis would set in. You would develop a raging fever, become violently delirious, and die quietly in the dirt. All because you chewed a nut at the wrong angle. Your mouth was literally a graveyard waiting to claim you.
And then there is the gravity tax. Remember how we talked about the great evolutionary trade-off of walking upright? That bipedal hardware upgrade completely compromised the mechanical integrity of your knees and your lower spine. Your ancestors spent all day running, lifting, and carrying heavy loads across uneven terrain without ergonomic, shock-absorbing sneakers. Joints wore out prematurely, spinal discs slipped and ruptured. And in a world where survival meant constant, daily physical movement, chronic back pain was not just uncomfortable. It meant you could not forage, you could not hunt, and you could not keep up with the tribe. But even worse than a blown-out knee was a simple scratch. Imagine walking through thick brush and a thorn tears a 2-inch gash down your calf. Today, you wash it with antibacterial soap and slap a sterile bandage on it. Back then, that open wound was a free, all-you-can-eat buffet for environmental pathogens. A minor scrape could quickly turn into gangrene. You would watch in absolute horror as your own leg slowly turned black and necrotized, knowing absolutely nothing could be done to stop the spread. But of all the mechanical failures, nothing was more brutally lethal than the fundamental act of creating new life. Let us go back to that evolutionary design flaw we discussed earlier, the massive human supercomputer brain trying to fit through a narrow, upright pelvis. For ancient adult women, reproduction was essentially a terrifying game of biological Russian roulette. Childbirth was arguably the single leading cause of death for females in the prime of their lives. If the baby was positioned even slightly wrong, or if the mother's pelvis was just a fraction of an inch too narrow, the entire biological system completely halted. There were no surgical interventions, there were no emergency epidurals or C-sections. Both the mother and the child would suffer through days of agonizing, screaming labor before ultimately succumbing to pure exhaustion, catastrophic hemorrhaging, or massive internal infection. The sheer lethality of human reproduction meant that just replacing the population was a massive, bloody sacrifice. Survival was not about battling saber-toothed tigers in epic showdowns. It was a daily, microscopic war against your own fragile hardware. So, looking at all this prehistoric carnage, you would logically assume that the moment we figured out how to farm, everything got magically better. The invention of agriculture is always taught as the greatest triumph in human history. We stopped running from predators, we built permanent shelters, we planted neat little rows of wheat, and we finally relaxed. It sounds like a massive biological upgrade, right? Well, prepare yourself for the biggest plot twist in our evolutionary timeline. Farming did not save us. From a purely biological standpoint, the invention of agriculture absolutely destroyed our health. It was arguably the biggest downgrade the human body ever experienced. Think about the fuel you were putting into your body as a hunter-gatherer. You were eating a wildly diverse, nutrient-dense diet of wild game, seasonal berries, leafy greens, nuts, and tubers. Your biological engine was running on premium, high-octane fuel. Then, around 12,000 years ago, we suddenly traded that diverse menu for a monocrop diet. We started eating almost nothing but cultivated wheat, barley, rice, and corn. We essentially flooded our biological engines with cheap, low-grade carbohydrates.
The archaeological evidence for this is absolutely shocking. When anthropologists look at the skeletons of the first farmers and compare them to the hunter-gatherers who lived just a few generations earlier, less than, greater than, the farmers look like they have been chronically starved. Average human height literally plummeted. Less than, greater than. Our bones became noticeably thinner and more brittle, riddled with signs of severe nutritional stress and massive vitamin deficiencies. And remember that ticking time bomb in your mouth we talked about earlier? Well, agriculture threw gasoline on that fire. By suddenly switching to a diet dominated by starchy, sticky grains, we essentially bathed our teeth in liquid sugar all day long. The naturally occurring bacteria in our mouths threw an absolute block party. For the first time in human history, widespread tooth decay and massive cavities became a completely normal part of everyday life. We traded the occasional chipped tooth for systemic, rotting, dental agony across the entire population. We were shorter, we were weaker, and our mouths were literally rotting out of our skulls. But the diet was only half the problem. The real killer was our brand new living arrangement. When we built permanent farming villages, we did not just move in with other humans. We invited the animals to live right inside with us. We domesticated pigs, cows, sheep, and chickens. And we lived side by side with them in densely packed, highly unsanitary mud huts. We essentially built the world's first massive biological petri dishes. By living in such close, dirty proximity to large groups of livestock, we gave animal-borne pathogens the absolute perfect opportunity to jump the species barrier and completely hack into our biological operating systems. This was the terrifying birth of zoonotic diseases. It is the exact moment in human history when things got truly apocalyptic for our immune systems.
Measles aggressively mutated from a virus found in cattle.
The flu was downloaded directly from our new domesticated ducks and pigs. Smallpox, one of the most devastating, terrifying killers in all of human history, likely originated from an animal pox virus. Before agriculture, if a deadly virus emerged in a small, isolated nomadic tribe of 40 people, it would kill them quickly and then just hit a dead end. The virus would burn out and die with the tribe. But in a permanent farming village packed with hundreds of people, surrounded by other closely connected trading villages, that same virus now had a massive, endless network to spread through. We unknowingly built the absolute perfect optimization algorithm for infectious disease, engineering the very plagues that would go on to wipe out millions of people over the next 10 millennia. So if the ancient world was a non-stop meat grinder of predators, parasites, mechanical failures, and rotting teeth, we are left with a massive evolutionary paradox. Why on earth did nature program human bodies to survive for decades after our reproductive prime? Think about it logically. Nature is an incredibly ruthless accountant. It absolutely hates wasting energy. For most species on this planet, the moment their reproductive window closes, they are completely obsolete. A Pacific salmon swims upstream, lays its eggs, and immediately rots to death. It is built in biological obsolescence. But humans are completely weird. Women experience menopause and completely lose the ability to reproduce. Yet their bodies are engineered to live for another 30, 40, or even 50 years. Why would evolution grant us this massive extended warranty when food was scarce and every extra mouth to feed was a massive liability? The answer is known in evolutionary biology as the grandmother hypothesis, and it proves that the elderly were the single most valuable piece of technology an ancient tribe possessed. In a prehistoric world completely devoid of written language, the only way to store information was neurologically. You could not just pull up a map on your phone or check a medical wiki when someone got sick. The tribe's survival depended entirely on human hard drives. Imagine a catastrophic 20-year drought suddenly hits the savanna. The rivers dry up, the grazing animals vanish, and the young, incredibly fit 30-year-old hunters are in a state of total panic. They have never seen a drought like this before in their entire lives. Their physical strength is completely useless against the weather. But sitting quietly by the fire is a 70-year-old grandmother. She does not hunt, and she walks with a pronounced limp.
But 50 years ago, when she was a small child, she survived a drought exactly like this one. She remembers the exact location of a hidden underground spring 3 valleys over. She remembers how to dig up a very specific, deeply buried tuber that stores water. She knows exactly which scraped tree bark reduces a raging fever and which brightly colored mushrooms will shut down your nervous system. She is the walking, breathing search engine of the Paleolithic era. Her biological hard drive is absolutely packed with extremely rare, highly specific survival data. Evolution figured out that having these living databases stick around to help feed, protect, and educate their grandchildren dramatically increased the chances that those grandchildren would survive the horrific childhood gauntlet we talked about earlier. By passing down generational knowledge, the elders became the ultimate evolutionary cheat code.
Nature gladly paid the energy cost to keep them alive, because their wisdom was the difference between life and death for the entire genetic line. So, look at your hands one more time. The next time you hear someone say that life in the past was just a short, miserable sprint to your 30th birthday, you will know the actual truth. Your ancestors were not fragile, pathetic creatures who simply expired when their youth faded. They were tough, scarred, violently resilient survivors forged in the most unforgiving environments imaginable. Every single one of your direct ancestors beat the terrifying, bloody odds of prehistoric infancy. They survived the mechanical betrayals of their own bones and teeth. They navigated the lethal gauntlet of childbirth, and they weathered the catastrophic plagues unleashed by the very farms that were supposed to save them. They fought tooth and nail, day after agonizing day, against a cold and indifferent universe. And they won. They kept the fire burning long enough to pass on an unbroken, miraculous chain of DNA. A biological baton handed off through millions of years of deep time, just so you could sit comfortably right now, breathing easy, looking at a glowing screen.